Hi there, everyone, and welcome to your blood flow distribution lecture. Or, I guess a better way to actually put it would be blood flow redistribution. Because really, what we're talking about is a very, very crucial aspect of our cardiovascular systems when we go from rest to exercise. Probably one of the more important things that occurs is the change in how we shift where and how blood flows in our body. So let's take a look at how that works and why that's so important. So first up, we'll just take a look at this pie chart as far as when we're at rest, and then we'll take a look at exercise. We can probably already notice a fairly large difference there, but let's again look at the absolute value here at rest. It's about 5 liters or 5,000 milliliters of cardiac output. So remember, cardiac output is our heart rate times our stroke volume. When we're looking at that 5 liters at rest, and again, this is the same between trained and untrained individuals, we can see that about 20% goes to muscle, 20% to the liver. The liver's really metabolically active for a few different reasons. If you can remember back to the Cori cycle, as far as energy production, that's part of it, but it also does a really, really important job as far as filtering and detoxifying different components of things that we eat or metabolic byproducts and stuff like that. So liver's really, really active, really important. Kidneys as well, they're really, really active because they filter blood quite regularly. So they get a lot of distribution, and that's how we maintain our fluid balance in our bodies, is through the kidneys. So again, it's kind of this ongoing juggling act that the kidneys do between making sure that we have the right amount of salt and not too much water, and vice versa, just to make sure that we keep enough fluids within our bodies. Our brain, obviously important. We want to make sure lots of energy, such as oxygen as well as food stuff like glucose, like energy. So metabolic substrate get to the brain because we want it to be alive, active, and working well. So those are kind of the main components as far as where blood goes when we're at rest, and then others, the rest of the body, our heart and skin. Now, when we look at the pie chart here that represents how blood flow is distributed when we're exercising, I think one of the really important things to remember right off the top is this absolute value of exercise, okay? Where we have 25 liters now. So there's a 5-fold increase in this example of cardiac output, okay? So again, that comes from heart rate and stroke volume. Immediately we can see that the majority of this increased blood flow or cardiac output goes to muscles and working skeletal muscle specifically. Okay, so about 84%. It's a huge amount, right? But something to be aware of and make note of is while the absolute amounts for, say, our digestive organs, such as the liver and kidneys, or just organs in general, go down, the absolute amount, if we're looking at skin and the brain, actually go up. So even though they're smaller percentages here, 14% versus 4, and where skin 6% versus 2, we can notice that it goes from about 3 to 6 liters, so the skin doubles, and the brain increases, well, about 200 milliliters. Okay. Yeah, so again, the absolute values go up. However, the percentage of this larger number is smaller. That's all that says. But for sure, other organs such as our liver and kidneys, our digestive tract, those sorts of parts of our body decrease in blood flow when we start exercising. Okay, well, let's explore why that is. So why does this occur? I think the skeletal muscle is pretty obvious. They are the things that are generating energy. They need oxygen to be that receptor for electrons and hydrogen protons at the end of ETC, but also we need lots of glucose and SHIP2 working muscles, as well as metabolic byproducts pulled away from muscles. So we need lots of blood flow there. Okay, but what's going on here with the, in particular skin, but brain, as well as our digestive organs? Let's take a look. So as we start exercising, again, our cardiac output, most of it gets redistributed to our working muscle. The one thing as far as why we get this increased blood flow to our skin that's really, really crucial is it helps us dissipate heat. So a lot of say mammals, well, not necessarily mammals, but there's a lot of animals out there that don't have this capacity. So a good example is the idea of how we evolved this ability to dissipate heat through our skin and how important that was for our survival. So the idea is, or the theory postulates that we were persistent hunters. So what does that mean? Well, that means that even though we might not have been the fastest creature in the forest, on the savannah, etc., what we were able to do was be able to track down and continually and persistently get our prey. And here's a really good example why this illustrates blood flow to the skin and being able to help us thermoregulate, why that capacity is so important. So in the example of us hunting a deer or a deer-like mammal, what ends up happening is they can't sweat. So they don't sweat, they don't have heat going to the surface of their skin because they don't have any glands to be able to do that, covered in fur. So the only way that deer can thermoregulate is through panting, breathing, right? So they stick their tongue out. You see this with dogs as well, right? Similar idea. So they hang their tongues out and thermoregulate or cool themselves that way. So when they get exercising, anaerobically, they have this great capacity to bound away, have lots of speed. They're definitely much quicker on land than we are. But if we keep persistently forcing these creatures to go into anaerobic work, we know that increase of body temperature associated with anaerobic work will slowly accumulate, and they won't be able to thermoregulate anymore, so they won't be able to essentially keep exercising. And so what you'll find with animals when they get that hot is they'll just lay down. And so as persistent hunters, if we continually just keep these animals moving in a manner that they can no longer thermoregulate, they typically just lay down. And then it's a much easier animal to capture at that point in time. So, whereas us, humans, we have this capacity to sweat and shuffle or move or redistribute all our blood flow to our skin, which allows heat to dissipate through it. Okay, so again, I tried giving a really good story or analogy there to try to understand that concept, because that's really, really important as far as our exercise capacity and our ability to redistribute blood. Okay. If we think about the heart, so remember, myo is muscle, cardio is heart. So the muscle in our hearts, the blood flow there increases about fourfold, and that's again because of our cardiac output increasing. We have those coronary arteries that are pull right off the aorta and keep blood flowing to the heart, and that's obviously good if the heart's going to need to increase in heart rate. And the last is we do see an increase in blood flow to the brain, increases about 25%. And a lot of that is to keep our motor neurons kind of going, but also our visual spatial capacity. Everything gets heightened as far as our awareness. And to be able to keep our neurons in our brains metabolically active, we need to increase that blood flow to them. Okay. I know what you're thinking. Sean, that's great information. Thanks for covering how blood gets redistributed in the body. But you haven't really told us how that gets shuffled around. How does our body actually move, say, blood from our organs towards our skin and our brain? Like, how does it pick and choose where this blood goes? Well, there's this really cool system of capillary beds with sphincters, or in particular capillary bed sphincters, okay? So we have this third type of muscle in our body, and there's three main categories. So far we've covered skeletal, we've covered cardiac, but there's this other part called smooth muscle. And it differs from the other two in primarily that one of the main things is it's not under our conscious control. It's kind of done automatically. So what will happen is it will receive signals within, and we'll talk about what the signals are in a moment, from our body, and they will essentially tighten. So a sphincter is like a muscle that's around a vessel or a tube and will slowly close. So here in our capillary beds, we can see we have these pre-capillary bed sphincters. So it's only on the arterial side, not on the venule side. And the reason is, well, we want it to stop before it gets to the tissue or organ or whatever is situated by these capillary beds. Okay, great. So what does affect these sphincters? What tells them to close or relax, or as the terms are more correctly called, vasodilate? So dilation is to get bigger, or vasoconstrict, which is to get smaller, right? How does this happen? Well, we have intrinsic and extrinsic controls of these, okay? But just before we get to that, the whole setup of our circulatory system is something called a parallel circuit. So essentially what that means is blood from the heart can flow to any organ or tissue within our body without having to go through another organ or tissue to get there. So what that allows us to do again is utilize these precapillary sphincters to close off blood flow to one organ or tissue and allow it to flow to another, and vice versa, depending on what the needs of our body are and what sort of signals they get. Okay. So when we take a look at these extrinsic controls of vasoconstriction, again getting tight, or dilation, which is widening or opening of the vessels, it's primarily hormonal, as we can see here. So we have our norepinephrine and epinephrine hormones. One is by the sympathetic nerves and primarily causes vasoconstriction. So that's norepinephrine, and it's good to know these and what they do. And then there's a release of epinephrine, which, depending on the recipient tissue, can cause vasoconstriction and vasodilation at the same time, okay? And just as a reminder, again, because we haven't really covered it, sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight. So when we really quickly need to flee from danger, right? So at rest, what we'll see is we'll have vasoconstriction to the muscles, okay? And then vasodilation. And that's what causes that shift between, say, blood flow going from our organs and shifts it to working muscles, is this vasoconstriction, again, to the areas where we don't want blood flow happening. With exercise, though, we get this sympathetic activation of the smooth muscle pre-capillary sphincters, and that causes our inactive tissues like liver, kidneys, etc., intestines, so rest and digest, to actually constrict. And then we don't have blood flow going there anymore. We can shunt it over to working muscles. Okay, so that's like extrinsic to the vessels themselves as far as the control mechanisms, but intrinsically there is autoregulation, and what happens is changes in skeletal muscle during exercise, they stimulate those smooth muscle sphincters and essentially increase vasodilation. So again, there's like the local regulators from working muscle will cause vasodilation. Okay. Now, it should be important to note here that there's a bit of a juggling act as far as how much vasodilation occurs. Now, intuitively or at first thought, we might think, hey, the more vasodilation that occurs, the better, right? But that's not necessarily the case. So for example, we only have a certain amount of blood in our body. So what will happen is with our cardiac output, if we just vasodilate and our cardiac output stays the same, all of a sudden we have way more space in our vasculature to accommodate blood, but we don't have the heart working or pumping enough blood for cardiac output to keep blood pressure up. So what would happen in that scenario, again, if you vasodilate vasodilate your capillary beds without having some sort of compensatory mechanism, is you'd pass out. So there wouldn't be enough blood pressure to get blood up to your head or the rest of your body. So you pass out. So what ends up happening is you get the sympathetic stimulation to increase cardiac output. So heart rate increases and or stroke volume, which then increases blood pressure to accommodate that vasodilation. All right, so we've primarily spoken about so far as pumping blood out of the heart, getting it to the tissues, and seeing what happens in that capacity. And so we'll now need to look at the other side, so the venous return. So there is some veno or venous constriction, and what's important with that component is our veins actually hold the majority of our blood at any given moment, and so having a little bit, and it's not as significant as, say, how our arteries can maintain their shape or the elasticity of our arteries, but it does definitely help and really is our capacitance of blood vessels. So it's like our storage capacity for blood is our venous system. So how does this work? How do we get blood moving through our veins? And I think one of the important things to remember here is from the previous lecture where we were talking about how blood pressure is really, really low in veins. It's almost nothing, right? Especially by the time it gets back to our heart. So how does blood move then? If we're not pushing it through some sort of pressure generated by the heart, how do we get blood back up against gravity to our heart, right? Say from our legs. Well, one of the main ways is muscle pumps with one-way valves. So for example, our muscles, when they contract, and we'll see a really good illustration of this, will essentially cause that pressure around the vessel and almost like squeeze or milk up the venous blood back up towards our heart with the assistance of one-way valves. So just like our heart itself with the chambers and the one-way valves that shut, as blood flows through, the valves will open as gravity pulls the blood in our venous system back down. It'll actually shut the valve, so now it's moved up, and you just go through a sequence of those systems. And we might have seen maybe someone you know, but typically older individuals, where these valves get worn down, they get broken over time, and you can actually see larger pools of blood in people's veins. Varicose veins is a common illustration of that. Okay. The other way that blood can get back to the heart is through something called a respiratory pump, and ultimately what this is just with our breathing, so our expiration, which is breathing out, and inspiration, which is breathing in, it forces, again, in a very similar fashion, kind of like that increase and decrease of pressure in our chest and our abdomen with our breathing. It moves blood back to the heart. So here's that illustration that I said that was really, really good. So again, we see our valves here, and as, say, our muscles in our calf contracts, looks like this person's walking. So again, very subtle movements can cause this to occur. You push the blood into this chamber, if you will, of our veins. As the muscle contracts, though, you notice that there's back pressure onto this valve, and so it will close, but the blood above this muscle contraction will actually push now this next valve open and move closer up to the heart. Okay, and then again, that happens both through skeletal muscle and our respiratory pressure changes in our chest and our abdomen.